Season 1 of Diablo 4 is releasing tomorrow, and a lot of people are asking themselves what character is the right one for them. A lot of things have been changed, but I will do the best to answer that question. So there's just been a big patch and a lot of things have changed. Season 1 is coming out tomorrow and you might be wondering what class should I open, which one is the best one for me. So I'll try and break that down for you in this video here today. And let's kick it off with the Barbarian. With devastating attacks and unmatched ferocity, the Barbarian dominates the battlefield. If you enjoy the warrior archetype, like wielding multiple weapons, experiencing close quarter combat, and unleashing brutal force, you might want to consider the path of the Barbarian in Diablo 4. So Barbarian, let's talk about what happened in the patch. So first of all, Barbarian, generally speaking, there were 3 viable builds. You could either go Hammer of the Ancients, which was the strongest build. That's the one with the hammer where you actually like hit the floor and everything explodes. There used to be an aspect for that build that you could exploit to do much more damage, and they fixed that. So it's still probably going to be a top build. It's probably still pretty strong, but it's much weaker than it was in the last patch. Whirlwind was kind of unchanged. It will be affected by the fact that cooldown reduction was nerfed, so it will be much harder to have 100% uptime on your shouts. So that will probably hit the Whirlwind a bit, but probably still a very viable build. And there used to be Thorns, but the problem with Thorns is that it kind of relies on being able to tank to do damage, and defensive aspects and defense in general in this game was heavily nerfed. So it seems that it will be much harder to be able to actually tank hits as you go higher and higher in the end game content. So Thorns will probably not be viable. What might be viable is the Rupture build. It wasn't really a build in the last patch, but Rupture has been gaining multiple buffs, both on damage and attack speed, and also the unique involving the Rupture has been buffed, so we'll just have to see if that actually becomes a build. Charge might be a build. There's been a couple of buffs to Charge. We'll just kind of have to see how that plays out. But generally speaking, I think Barbarian was probably nerfed, but I don't know if as hard as other classes. So I think a general good spot to put the Barbarian would be in B tier. He's probably not going to be one of the strongest classes, but he's definitely going to be playable. If you enjoy that kind of warrior playstyle, you like being a frontline and using brutal force to destroy your enemies, you should definitely still consider Barbarian. That being said, Barbarian out of all of the classes probably has the worst early game. The leveling experience on Barbarian is pretty bad. But once you kind of like get that ball rolling, you get some levels, you get your gear, the Barbarian starts becoming more and more interesting and fun to play. So Barbarian probably B tier for the upcoming season. Next up is the Druid. If you enjoy transforming into fearsome beasts like the grizzly bear to pound your enemies to death, or embody the swiftness of nature itself, taking the form of a wolf dashing around, or maybe you want to control elements, conjuring storms, and calling upon lightning to strike down your foes, you might want to consider the path of the Druid in Diablo 4. So, Druid, let's talk about Druid and what happened to him in the patch. So, generally speaking, last patch, Druid was probably the strongest endgame class in the game. He had multiple viable builds that were very good at pushing higher nightmare dungeons and killing bosses, and had probably the best single target damage in the game, and also very good AoE and survivability. Mostly, generally speaking, he was untouched in the patch. His biggest nerf was the Grizzly Rage nerf. Grizzly Rage used to give you unstoppable for the entire duration, and now it's only 6 seconds, so that will definitely hurt. And Masochistic, which is a spirit boon passive that you would use on most builds with a Druid that would provide life steal every time you critical strike. It's a lucky hit as well, so you'll probably proc that much less, which also hurts. But generally speaking, the Rampaging Werebeast, which was the most broken aspect, probably not for Druid, but actually in the game, which allowed all these builds to be super strong, it was untouched. And the Dire Wolf aspect was also untouched. So when you kind of look at all the endgame super strong builds for Druid, whether it be the Tornado Werewolf, or the Shred, or the Claw, they all pretty much still work the same, and I expect Druid to still probably be the strongest endgame class in the game. So his only downfall will probably be 2 things. So generally speaking, he has a very slow early game. along with their Barbarian, they're probably the two worst classes in the early game. So they kind of need levels and gear to progress and get going forward. And most of the end game very viable builds for Druid are kind of locked behind unique drops. So if you want to play the Tornado Werewolf, you're going to need the Tempest Roar unique helm. If you want to play the Claw build, you're going to need the unique staff. If you want to play the Shred build, you're going to need the unique axe. So it might take a while to actually get the gear that you need and the level that you need to start kicking off on the Druid. But once you actually get there, it's an amazing feeling, and Druid is probably still the strongest endgame class in the game. So I think even though he got nerfed a bit, and even though he has a very slow early game, Druid is probably still S tier in the Season 1 of Diablo 4. Next up on our list is the Necromancer. If your idea of fun is harnessing the power of the dead, commanding legions of skeletal minions and exploding corpses, this might be it for you. Or maybe you enjoy the lust and gore of slaying your foes with blood magic. Even exploding enemies with bone spears is an option to explore with this master of the forbidden arts. If this is you, consider the path of the Necromancer in Diablo 4. So, Necro, what happened to Necro in the patch? So basically, last patch, Necro was, I'd say, an A+ kind of class. Bone Spear or Bone Necro in general was probably like an S tier kind of build, but most of the other builds on Necro were meh. Minions was a non-existent kind of build. Anyone whose fantasy of a Necromancer was to summon minions and command the army of the dead, well, that wasn't a thing. It was basically impossible to pull off and make it work. Blood Necromancer was kind of a thing for quite a while. There were some niche situations where Blood was actually really good in pushing higher Nightmare dungeons, but that's kind of something that got fixed. There was a kind of exploit that you could do with Blood Necro that was fixed by Blizzard, so that's no longer a thing. And going into this patch, Bone Necromancer was nerfed. Definitely not destroyed or anything. It's probably still a top meta build. Will probably still be very strong. Minions got slight buffs, and there were also some slight buffs for Blood Lance. So maybe Blood is a thing. Maybe Minions can be a thing. We'll kind of have to see how that plays out. But generally speaking, I think Necros will still be a very fine class. Bone Necro is still very, very strong. And even with the nerfs, I think Necromancer is still probably an A tier class. It's probably stronger than the Barbarian, and one of the best things that it has going for the Necro is it's very good early on. Bone Necro is very good for leveling. The class has a very good early game, and it can kind of like smooth into the mid and late game. And even in the end game, Bone Necro will probably still be very strong. So that's why I'm going to put it a bit above the Barbarian. In the end game, they're probably quite about the same force, but the Necro has a much better earlier game, so I'm going to put Necro in A tier. Next up on our list is the Sorcerer. If the mage archetype is your idea of fun, the Sorcerer is a true embodiment of the arcane fantasy. Unleashing devastating spells of immense power, ice, fire, and lightning are just a step on the way as you unravel the true mysteries of the arcane. If you're drawn to the arts of magic, consider the path of the Sorcerer. Oh my god, Sorcerer. It's around that time. What can I actually say about the Sorcerer?
This gives me an idea. She's dead.
Sorcerer. This one's a hard one. So, Sorcerer in the previous patch was already, I believe, the most struggling class. It had serious issues with cooldown and maintaining uptime on his skills, and then there was also an energy issue. So, Sorcerers kind of fell off the further and further you went on into the endgame content. And then this patch comes out and Sorcerers were obliterated. I'd say Sorcerer was the most heavily nerfed class out of all the classes, which makes no sense because it was pretty bad even in the previous patch. So basically Devouring Blaze, which was the passive Sorcerers were using to get critical strike damage on burning enemies, which was everyone if you were using the Fireball enchantment slot. That was destroyed. It went down from 75% to 30%. And then they also nerfed the aspect with that did increase damage to frozen enemies, which was another one the Sorcerers were using. So Sorcerer's damage just got pretty much destroyed. And It saddens me to say it because I believe that a mage archetype in a game like Diablo is very important, and I understand that a lot of people, that's the gameplay that they enjoy. They want to play a sorcerer. It's like you have it in every RPG game. There's always a sorcerer, and I just can't recommend it. I don't know. Like if fun is also important, and if you want to play sorcerer, you can go ahead and play sorcerer, but it gets to a certain point that being fundamentally weaker than other classes, I just don't know if that's fun. And I kind of feel like that's where the sorcerer is right now. So I'm just gonna put sorcerer in dog shit tier. It's pretty much unplayable at this point. Last on our list is the rogue. If your idea of fun is stealth and deception, this might be the class for you. Become a master of the shadows, utilizing agility and cunning tricks to outwit your enemies. Daggers, traps, bows and crossbows, a true embodiment of dexterity and speed. If striking swiftly from the shadows is appealing to you, consider the path of the rogue. So the rogue, let's talk about what happened to the rogue with this patch. So basically, not too much actually, which is very good for the rogue because it was in a very good place. Major nerf that the rogue got, the main major nerf was a nerf to siphoning strikes, a passive rogues were using to get lifesteal off of critical hits. That was now changed into a lucky hit, so you can proc it much less, very similar to what happened with the Druid. So that one would probably hurt. But generally speaking, all the rest was pretty much left alone. And that's a very good thing for the Rogue, because as I said, the Rogue is probably all around the best class in Diablo 4. Reason being, it has the best early game out of all the classes in Diablo 4. You can just speed farm through the entire early game. Very, very strong. You have multiple viable builds that are S tier in the end game. If you want to play melee, you can play Twisting Blades. If you want to play range, you can play Barrage. Even Penetrating Shot got a new unique that can maybe make it become an interesting build. We'll just have to see how that plays out. But even if you want to kind of mix and match, you don't know if you want to play melee, you don't know if you want to play rage, you like both of them, you can play Flurry with Rapid Fire. You can do a lot of things with the Rogue, and all of them just seem to work. This class is super, super fast, super, super strong, super fun, and probably just all around the best class in the game right now. So we're going to put it in S tier above the Druid. Reason being, late game wise, they're probably about the same strength. Druid might even be stronger, but Rogue also has the early game in its pocket. It's just good at everything. It's strong at all phases of the game, and Druid is very weak in the early game. So all around, I think Rogue is probably the best class to open in Season 1 of Diablo 4. So let's do a quick summary of what we talked about here. So you can see the tier list here in front of you. Obviously, I think the best classes to open in Diablo 4 are going to be the Rogue and the Druid, but Necro and Barbarian are going to be completely fine for most of the content you're probably going to do in the game. I'd say most people are probably not going to even attempt to do Nightmare Dungeons 100 and Uber Lilith and all of these kinds of stuff. So if you're just in the game, you know, to enjoy and play and go through the world and do all these world events and stuff, and even like Nightmare Dungeons below, I'd say 60, probably completely doable with the Necro and the Barbarian. So if that's kind of the archetype you like to play and that's your fantasy for RPG, you definitely go for Barbarian and Necro as well. I just think Rogue will be probably the most efficient. And Sorcerer, I just think Sorcerer is in a horrible place right now. Obviously, if that's your dream, you can play Sorcerer. But that's just my take on stuff. And that will be it. Let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this video, if it helped you out. And see you guys in the next one.